Good evening. We're going to start within the next 5 minutes, please. If people could take their seats, 5 minutes, thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Anyone outside still planning to join us? Now is your opportunity to please enter the venue. We're about to start. So thank you very much. Welcome to Plaatje. Thank you for coming on time and joining us for this auspicious occasion. We are very welcome. You are all very welcome, and I'm extremely happy to actually meet Justice Cameron in person. For the first time, I've seen him everywhere, and we have a number of topics in common that I'm hoping I can share with him later on. But I think you've joined us for a very interesting and informative annual lecture of Plaatje. So thank you for coming. I just want to give some logistics for people who may be new to our campus and the library auditorium in particular. If you need to use restrooms, all you have to do is exit on either side and move towards the back, and you'll see the necessary indicators. If, however, you have problems, we do also have staff members on hand that can assist. So welcome. I don't want to steal Justice Majiedd's thunder by welcoming the special guests by name. All I'm going to say is I'm extremely happy also to inform you that Prof. Balim is my homeboy, and I'm hoping that comes up as a topic at a later point. So, Judge Majiedt, please, if you can do the opening for us.
I'm going to stand here, but later with the Q&A, you won't mind if I sit over there. Good evening, everybody. Program Director, my colleagues, Justice Cameron, the special guest, who I'll say something about a little later, and not the formal introduction, but I need to say a few personal words about him. And also my colleagues, the Judge President of this division, and also the Acting Judge President. Judge Mamasebo is here, and the Vice Chancellor, the Chair of Council, and Vice Chair of Council, Mr. Molusi. He says they call him the nameless Vice Chair of Council. He is here. Other members of Council. All protocols observed, ladies and gentlemen. On the 9th of October is Sol Plaatje's, late Solomon Tekisho Plaatje's birthday, and around this time we always have a Sol Plaatje celebration weekend, and this year coincides with the commencement of the 10-year celebrations of this young baby institution. But also there is another angle to this event, and that is that we have a Chancellor's Forum. And as the name depicts, all chancellors of universities throughout the country serve on that Chancellor's Forum. And Justice Cameron and I are on that forum because, as many of you may know, he's the Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. And we in the Chancellor's Forum thought that we should visit universities and make them aware of our existence. And we thought that this will be a good occasion to introduce the forum and also to speak about constitutionalism at this annual lecture, which is a prestigious lecture in honor of a great South African, a great philosopher, a great author, the first Secretary General of the African National Congress, a man who epitomizes what it means to be a servant leader, who shunned public office and sought to promote his organization and to better his own personal advancement, Solomon Tekisho Plaatje. And so on this occasion, it is wonderful to have Justice Cameron here and to have all of you here. We chose the topic of constitutionalism because it is very topical at the moment. Last year, I was privileged to go to a law conference in Dublin, Ireland, and last year the Irish Constitution turned 100 years. 30 years ago, our interim constitution of 1993 became law, and of course 3 years later the final constitution. And at that conference, where there were many chief justices from Ireland, from Northern Ireland, from New Zealand, and also prominent academics, there was a Lord Justice Sales from the UK Supreme Court, and they, during the course of my presentation afterwards, expressed great interest in what is happening in South Africa. They lauded our constitution for its progressiveness and the work of the Constitutional Court and other courts, the judiciary. But they also expressed, how shall I call it, they were a bit concerned about what's happening in the country. And they thought that the Constitution is under attack. And we thought that it would be good to speak about the Constitution, that I shouldn't do the speaking because I'm sitting at that court, but somebody who can escape unscathed speaking about the Constitution and the work of the court and its jurisprudence, a retired justice, not quite untouchable, but almost untouchable because he's retired, Justice Edwin Cameron. Let me conclude these opening remarks by saying something about Edwin. Our registrar, Dr. Sidras, will introduce him formally and more comprehensively, but I need to say a few personal words about Edwin. Many of you know him. He's an absolute legend. He's a very strong jurist. He's one of the best legal minds in South Africa that I've ever come across. And when I was appointed to the Constitutional Court in 2019, I took over his chambers. And I don't know, one day when we were playing golf at our estate in Joburg, a friend of mine spoke about a house not having feng shui because it's got all these steeples. And I had to go and look at that word afterwards in Wikipedia. What is feng shui? And it's a certain aura in the house. And I don't know if judges' chambers are feng shui, but that chamber certainly has feng shui, Edwin. Edwin is one of the kindest, warmest human beings you could find, one of the most humble human beings, despite all his achievements. And to me, he's an inspiration. He is one of the cohort of judges who took over just after the first group. And his cases speak for themselves, his judgments that he's written. Even some of the minority judgments, which I frequently quote, Tladla and cases like those, are excellent pieces of jurisprudence. And so I say these personal words because, Edwin, I'm so grateful that you've arrived, that you came. I understand that some of our colleagues are online. I think Dr. Judith Lamini, the Chancellor of Wits University, is online. I think Professor Tyron Pretorius from my old alma mater from University of Western Cape, the VC, is online. And there may be one or two other chancellors, and colleagues, you are all welcome. It's a wonderful occasion to be here. I need to also mention that I know I'm not doing the formal welcome, but I must mention that Dr. Nhlanhla Mnisi, Edwin's spouse, is here. Nhlanhla, we haven't seen each other in a long time. Welcome, my brother. And to all of you, I hope you enjoy the session. And afterwards, when we do the Q&A, please feel free to ask any questions. Criticize the court's jurisprudence as much as you want, because I won't be answering. It will be Edwin answering. Thank you. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Justice Majiedt. Now for the formal welcome. This will be done by our VC, Professor Andrew Crouch. So I give over to him.
Thank you, Professor Meyer. I think a lot has been said already in terms of welcoming the audience to Plaatje University, so I'll try and keep my comments brief. It's indeed a pleasure for me to welcome everybody here in the audience and those online. I always say if you're online, at least we can play you a recording of what the university looks like. Whereas if you are physically present, we can always take you on a tour of the university, and we do have people who can take you around outside of this main hall. Justice Majiedt, Chancellor of Plaatje University, and Ms. Rowena Majiedt, Justice Cameron, our guest speaker, and his spouse, Dr. Nhlanhla Mnisi, Dr. Soul, the Premier of the Northern Cape, if he's online, Judge President of the Northern Cape High Court, Judge Pule. I've seen him earlier. Welcome. Other members of the judiciary present. Our Chair of Council, Judge Patswane. I would have been in big trouble if I haven't acknowledged the Chair of Council. She is my boss after all. Members of the senior management team, our ex-Vice-Chancellor, Professor Yunus Balam, good friend and ex-colleague of mine, and his family here present. Mr. de Kock, good friend of Plaatje University. Donor representatives from De Beers who are present, Ms. Josephine Peters, who's sitting in front here. The Director General of in the Department of Higher Education and Training, Dr. Sishi, and his deputy, Dr. Sotikwa. Staff, students of Plaatje University, ladies and gentlemen, feel warmly welcomed on this Friday afternoon. We chose a particularly hot day for you. But I believe that outside the periphery of Kimberley, it is even hotter. I'm told that in Warrington, the mercury is around 38, 39 degrees. So we have a few degrees to go. It is not uncommon this time of the year for Kimberley to become extremely hot. But if you're from the Northern Cape, this is not really hot. It's really just the start of the season of heat. We are probably expecting a few more degrees in the 40s later in the year. I don't know if it's good for the farmers or not. Mr. de Kock can share that with us. We are here today to celebrate. Not only are we going to celebrate a remarkable individual called Solomon Plaatje, we're also to celebrate, as part of our decade celebrations, the 10th anniversary of Sol Plaatje University. Now, I said earlier in an earlier event where we were honoring Professor Bellum, I said that being 10 years old as a university means that you are a mere toddler in the lifetime of universities. But that doesn't mean that we are not functioning and acting in the true sense of a university. And that is what Sol Plaatje University has shown itself to be. Not only is it changing not only the physical landscape of Kimberley, but I would also say the academic landscape of this city. This lecture, named after Sol Plaatje, it's a lecture series that started in 1994. So this actually started before Sol Plaatje University as a university started. It started at the University of Botswana, currently the Northwest University. In 2009, the Northern Cape Department of Sports, Arts and Culture and the Sol Plaatje Educational Trust revived the series of lectures in Kimberley. The following year, that was in 2010, the lecture returned to Mahikeng, where it was co-hosted by Northwest University and the Northwest Provincial Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. The lecture was also previously held by Free State Province, organized by the Vrystaat Arts Festival. But we, as Sol Plaatje University, we are claiming this lecture series. And ever since then, it has been hosted by Sol Plaatje University. Since 2019, we have been honored to host the Sol Plaatje Memorial Lecture. And it is customary that it is normally held around this time, close to the birthday time, which is the 9th of October, of Sol Plaatje. So I think it's a couple of days from now. And this is to honor the name of this pioneering journalist, writer, linguist, and politician. And as I said, we at Sol Plaatje University, we're claiming this lecture series, so it's not going to go to the Northwest or the Free State, although we know that Sol Plaatje has roots in the Free State. But on a previous occasion, when I was addressing an audience here, I said that we are claiming the Sol Plaatje lecture series. So the annual Sol Plaatje lecture series is now a flagship event of this university. And it will, every year from now on, be part of the Sol Plaatje Memorial Weekend, which we will celebrate during this time around the birthday of Solomon Plaatje. Now, I should remind you as an audience that since the inception of this university, the expectation was that this university would emerge in a tradition of critical engagement and being a critically engaged humanist university. I even went as far in one of my previous engagements in saying that I would like to humanize higher education. And by humanizing it, one has to look at our curricula and everything we do from a humanistic point of view. Now that's strange coming from a person that's trained in the sciences, but it's not uncommon that if you are faced with human problems, you also have to look at it from all points of view, not only from a scientist or an engineer's point of view. Although the first Vice-Chancellor of this university is an engineer, and the second Vice-Chancellor is a scientist, it doesn't mean that we view the world with engineering eyes and scientific eyes. I certainly would like to think that I view it from a humanistic side. So all the time, we as a university would like to be engaged as a social participant. And I think the audience reflects what we are trying to do, to be a social participant facing the challenges of society. So constitutionalism, which is going to be the topic today, is part of that engagement, engaging with real issues, the human issues that face society today. And that is what a university should be. It's not just about the curricula, the engagement, the critical thinking. We must also face the challenges of society and thereby enabling participating in social, cultural, and economic life. So it's indeed a pleasure for me to welcome all of you here to this memorable occasion. Not only are we celebrating Saul Plaatje's memory, we are also celebrating our 10th anniversary. I'd like to particularly thank Justice Cameron for agreeing to be here today and to grace us with your presence, Judge. Thank you very much. With that, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the lecture.
Thank you, Prof. Crouch. I think you would have heard from what Prof. Crouch said and from what Justice Majiedt said. We have a number of justices presiding over what we do here today, so we have to get it legally right. That means I want to remind you, if you haven't checked yet, please check that your cell phone is in airplane mode or it's off. We'd appreciate it if our honored guest presentation is not interrupted. You've also been reminded on, the high temperatures. In my previous job, I did not like to report the weather about Kimberley because it never changed and I was never sure if those temperatures could be trusted. Now, thanks to the temperature today, I'm realizing the thermometer was never broken. Okay. I now will give over to our registrar, Dr. Cedras, who has the enviable job of introducing our guest speaker.
Good afternoon. I will merely observe all protocols as per the welcome address, acknowledging all of you who are here and those joining online. Thank you. Who is Edwin Cameron? He's an academic, an activist, author, and a retired justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa. In 1986, he joined Wits Center for Applied Legal Studies as a human rights lawyer, where he drafted the Charter of Rights on AIDS and HIV. He also co-founded the AIDS Consortium and founded and was the first director of the AIDS Law Project. He practiced as an advocate at the Johannesburg Bar from 1983 to 1994. During this time, his practice included labor and employment law. He defended freedom fighters, specifically ANC freedom fighters who were charged with treason. Also, he defended those who objected conscription based on conscientious and religious grounds. He defended those who were fighting for land tenure and as a result of forced removals. He also was a great advocate of gay and lesbian equality. He oversaw the gay and lesbian movement's submission to the Kempton Park negotiating process. For some who may be a bit too young, that's the CODESA talks that led to the negotiated settlement for our country. This, together with other work, help secure the explicit inclusion of sexual orientation in the South African Constitution. In September 1994, he was awarded the status of senior counsel. President Mandela also appointed him an acting judge and later as a judge of the High Court. In 1999 and 2000, he served for a year as an acting justice at the Constitutional Court. In 2000, Justice Cameron was appointed as a judge appeal to the Supreme Court of Appeal. In 2008, he was appointed a justice of the Constitutional Court. In the academic environment, he served as chair of council of Wits University from 1998 to 2008. Currently, as you have heard, Justice Cameron is also the Chancellor of Stellenbosch University. When he retired from the Constitutional Court, President Ramaphosa appointed him as inspecting judge for the Judicial Inspectorate for Correctional Services. Justice Cameron spent close to a quarter of a century on the bench. And something I've read, and which maybe not most of us would know about, he also loves quiche, I understand, as Chief Justice Mogoeng pointed out. He is a remarkable justice, activist, and a great South African who contributed to this country's development and continues to do so. I want to quote from Justice Cameron himself at a special session when he retired from the Constitutional Court in 2019, when he said, "The fight for our constitutional values is now more urgent than ever, and future-directed and future-regarded commitment is more vital than ever." Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest speaker, Judge Edwin Cameron. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much for your generosity, yours and the Chancellor's. Chairman of Council, I'm very pleased to sit next to you. I suffered for 10 years at Wits with Professor Balim, the first Vice-Chancellor, and I know a little bit about how tough the job is. I told Professor Crouch when I arrived, I said that the Chair of Council has a more difficult job than the Vice-Chancellor, which might be an exaggeration. Deputy Vice-Chancellor, Registrar, Vice-Chancellor, and my beloved fellow Chancellor. When I write to Justice Majiedt, I say to him, "My lieve vriend, wat gaan aan?" And we are beloved friends and colleagues, and it's wonderful that you're in that court. I think that your own stature and your own commitment to integrity and purity of governance are very powerful weapons in our democracy. And I want to pay tribute as well to Professor Balim and his family. I'm delighted to have met them all this evening and to know that there are at least some distinguished lawyers who can save us from the engineering that Professor Balim mentions. Also, Judge President, it's very good to see you here. We are honored by your presence. Thank you for coming in here. I want to speak about 3 dreams. 2 of them failed dreams, and 1 dream which is not failed. The failed dream that I start with was a dream that I grew up with. I was born in the 1950s, at school in the 1960s, university in the 1970s. It was the dream of apartheid. A dream of white supremacism, of white self-sufficiency, a dream of appropriation of a land mass beyond any justice or fairness or equity. It was a dream of domination and subordination. It was a reviling, harmful, and soiling dream that I grew up with. Archbishop Tutu was right. that while apartheid harmed black South Africans primarily, it also injured white South Africans like me. It is a dream that was rightly abandoned at the end of the 1990s and which we now rightly revile as embodying a crime against humanity since the 1973 Convention on all forms of apartheid. But let me move quickly to a second dream, a more noble dream, but an equally failed dream. It was the dream that when we became a democracy, and became a democracy under a magnificent constitution, we would have justice and dignity and equality and functioning institutions. That dream, too, has proved to be unrealized as of now. I'm going to come to the third dream later because it concerns the realization of the failed second dream. But on my way there, I want to do what your Chancellor tonight promised I would do, which is to talk about the roots of constitutionalism. And it gives me particular joy that one of the cleverest council in the country, a council called Tembeka Ngcukai Tobi. I'm about to say something about other senior counsel, Justice Majiedt. Maar waak my mond, let me not say. A man of integrity, a man of power and courage. He showed that constitutionalism did not invent itself in South Africa in 1990 when the Berlin Wall fell and when de Klerk on the 2nd of February 1990 opened up apartheid to its own demolition. He showed that constitutionalism went back to the 19th century leaders of black resistance to white supremacism in the Cape. And that Sol Plaatje is one of the founders of the African National Congress. It's actually in Tembeka's book. Sol Plaatje and the other leaders saw the good part of the dream that we can put our trust in impartial institutions, in impartial fairness, in just adjudication, in integrity, and in values. But most importantly, the most important part of the realizable dream is that we all subordinate ourselves, not before a wish for racial domination, that shameful wish that enveloped my childhood and youth and young adulthood, but that we place our faith in a set of values and a set of principles and a set of rules that are located in the rule of law and in constitutionalism, and that we are subordinate, each one of us, judges, corporations, popular movements, political parties, the legislature itself, are subordinate to that. That dream, that realizable dream, goes back to the founding of the African National Congress. And when we think what made our transition to a constitutional state possible, the notion of the law as a repository of fairness, of just process, but also more than just process, of just substantive allocations of power and of opportunity. That dream was kept barely alive at times, but kept alive in South Africa during the struggle against apartheid. When Mandela led young, hot-headed youth, Mandela in the 1950s, when he led the Defiance campaign, they'd specially adopted a statute to make it obligatory to sentence persons who advocated disobedience of the law for political ends to send them to jail. Mandela appeared before a white judge who suspended his sentence. He came out and he said, I will continue doing what I've done. He was never sent to jail under that new statute. The Law Society said we cannot have a lawyer who is advocating disobedience of the law. We have to strike him off. They brought a striking off application before 2 judges of the Transvaal High Court in the 1950s. And the 2 judges remarkably said, this is no ordinary advocacy of legal disobedience. This is inspired by a moral vision. They refused to strike Mandela off. Mandela entered prison as an enrolled attorney, and he came out of prison as an enrolled attorney. He was one of the treason trialists, 156 of them in the late 1950s, who were acquitted because of that commitment, that tiny flame of commitment under an unjust, oppressive, and subordinative system that was based in law. Make no mistake, apartheid abused the law, and hundreds of thousands and millions of South Africans, black South Africans, felt the oppressive injustice of the law, where the Constitutional Court, where Justice Majiedt now sits, guarding our country's future and the Constitution, where he sits, there were the pass law jail, numbers 4 and 5. Apart from the fort and the women's jail, there was a squalid jail for where thousands of black men were kept. They trawled the streets to find people who didn't have passes. This of people who were born in the urban areas, were born in South Africa, who were told they were not entitled to be in the urban areas. It was an outrage, and the Constitutional Court's main chamber is lined with the bricks from those prisons where so many hundreds and hundreds of thousands of past law offenders were incarcerated. Through the 1960s and the 1970s and the 1980s, that flame of commitment to the notion of a legal rule of law, of a legally embodied fairness, the idea of a justice behind it. It wasn't simply a rule. Why do you have the rule? You have the rule because behind it you believe in some concept of justice that the rule seeks to attain. It was kept alive. The 1973-4 Durban strikes, the first major working class uprising against apartheid, led within a short time, within 5 or 6 years, to massive labor reforms, the Vian reforms of 1979 and 80, the establishment of a labor court to secure labor and employment security in South Africa, and a big debate within the ANC-aligned unions of the 1980s was, do we go in or do we stay out? And partly under the leadership of a young man who'd founded the National Union of Mine Workers, Cyril Ramaphosa, they decided to go in, and substantive victories were secured through the apartheid-enacted labor and employment legislation in the 1980s. And the idea was that you can take the law and demand from the law the premise of justice and fidelity and impartiality and equity that it claims to have. You could hold the law to its own promises, and very occasionally you succeeded. That flame, that flickering flame that came so close to being snuffed out amidst the brutality and indignity and injustice and humiliations of apartheid, that flame made it possible for us eventually to have a transition to a Bill of Rights. There were geopolitical factors, the failure of apartheid, the international banking boycott, together with the mass uprising of 1983-4 in Kimberley, in Galeshewe, elsewhere throughout this province, where the ordinary people of South Africa rose up against apartheid. And I'll come back to this in due course, but part of that uprising was rooted in the founding of the African National Congress in 1912, which was an idea that you should rightly be skeptical about governmental power. I'll come back to the importance of that in due course. But the very important notion that you hold power to account, and that if power is unjustly wielded against you, you're entitled to rebel against it. That's one of the strengths of our country, that skepticism. So we had a transition sadly with the murder of Chris Hani, a transition sadly with the murder of tens of thousands of people under the leadership of the recently deceased Gatsha Mangosuthu Buthelezi. I make no apology for my version of history, which is there based in facts. The carnage of KwaZulu-Natal in the 1980s and early 1990s was an apartheid-driven carnage enacted by Buthelezi's thugs. Despite all of that, the Boipatong massacre, many other grievous acts, we managed to get a transition under this inspiring constitution. I fought for the constitution. I also fought for equality and dignity for minorities like LGBTI persons. A queer man like myself, a proudly queer man, came out under apartheid, fought for equality. We got a world first. The words sexual orientation in the interim constitution and in the final constitution were a world first. No other constitution anywhere in the world had ever had those two words. South Africa was a first. The idea that whether you are Venda speaking or Afrikaans speaking or straight or gay, that you have a dignity which entitles you to contribute to the greatness of our country. That was embodied at the heart of the Constitution. And it's an elaborate constitution. It's not a sketchy constitution like some other world constitutions. It's a detailed constitution, a whole thick booklet that sets out principles of governance, principles of administration, principles of policing and of security and of emergency. A detailed constitution, but at its heart lay the ideas of the supremacy of the rule of law in the Constitution, human dignity, which apartheid had desecrated, and equality, the fight for equality, the fight for the acknowledgement that the material means of life which are available to us determine our place in equality or inequality, that you have to make a society that is more equal in the means of access to material goods in society. Well, now we come to the second dream. And it's a sorry dream. The dream was that we would have a new elite who would commit themselves truthfully and honestly to the fulfillment of the Constitution. And it's a dream that has not been proved realizable until now because of corruption. Not just incidental corruption, police note, a roadblock, but systematized mass corruption by criminal syndicates in our tertiary institutions. I was speaking to the chair of council, Judge Patswane, on the way in here, where it is known and believed that criminal syndicates have taken over the councils of at least one major university, one of our most important major universities, and the attempt at Fort Hare, the University of Fort Hare, a university integral to our notion of advancement and equality across the racial lines, where criminal syndicates sought to extract rents from tertiary sector allocations. So mass corruption throughout the governing party, throughout governance, and crumbling and ineffective state institutions. An economy that seems waterlogged, incapable of expansion or movement. A whole litany of misery. But luckily, we are not captured. We are not captured. I'm going to give you the good news now. The good news is the third dream. And it's a worthy dream. I'm glad you're smiling. Please smile. It's a worthy dream. The dream of apartheid was despicable. It soiled us all. Soiled those it sought to victimize, most of all, but soiled people like me as well. The dream of an easy, self-fulfilling, self-manifesting transition of fidelity to a set of aspirations and visions that Sol Plaatje had when he founded the organization that took over governance in 1994. That dream has failed. The third dream is a dream that our wishes and aspirations, our ambitions, our optimistic foresight is still capable of realization. That is a dream that is worth fighting for. Now let me give you the details. Why is that not a dream that is incapable of realization? Why is it a practically manageable dream? I start with what I've already mentioned, which is that we have a complex society that produced, whatever you think of the African National Congress now, and one of the virtues of our constitution is that it enables free political expression, a manifestation of multiplication of political parties. So, whatever you think of the African National Congress, the fact that in 1912 it was committed to a set of aspirations, and a set of aspirations that were directed to justice for every South African. A set of aspirations that included non-racialism, and a set of aspirations that had at its heart the notion that you can tackle power when it seeks to subordinate you, to oppress you unjustly. That was the spirit of the United Democratic Front in the 1980s, the spirit of saying, no, we will not tolerate subordination to an unjust apartheid. And that's the spirit that our people still have. It's a skepticism about governmental power, which we make the mistake in South Africa of believing that we are exceptional. Too often we're not exceptional. We're exceptional in rugby, maybe in cricket as well, I hope. But the one thing in which we are exceptional is the fact that we have a people who are doubtful about power. That's a great advantage. The second one is a media which is freer than almost anywhere else in the world. Our media are free to investigate, to speak out, to denounce, to reveal in a way that across 2/3 of the land mass of this planet would land them in jail. Most of Africa, even the functioning democracies of Africa like Kenya, media freedom is nothing like what we have in South Africa today. So we have a powerful media tradition also going back to the early 1800s. The idea that you have to answer to a media which is an agent of public skepticism. Another great advantage is our non-governmental sector. It's a tradition that goes back to under apartheid, where a lot of governmental and non-governmental organizations in media, in education, in feeding, addressing the nutritional needs of South Africans. A lot of governmental, non-governmental organizations existed and flourished, and they survived the transition. Some people actually said at the time of transition, we don't need those NGOs anymore. How wrong they were. We still need them. And then also tied to the skepticism, tied to the non-governmental organizations, is this spirit of legal challenge. It started when a humble firm was started in the city centre of Johannesburg. Justly famous names, Mandela and Tambo, in a rundown office in Diagonal Street in Johannesburg. Mandela started the notion that the law should be there to provide for the oppressed. And that was a concept and a vision that was sustained when the Centre for Applied Legal Studies, as Dr. Cedrus has shown, when I joined it in the 1980s. It was founded in 1978. Soon afterwards, the Centre for Applied Legal Studies helped start the Legal Resources Centre. Lawyers for Human Rights was founded. In Pretoria, I happen to know because my sister is greatly involved with it, the Citizens Advice Bureau, a group of entirely voluntary people who run an office to which people who are seeking relief against government agencies or unjust employers or other forms of obstruction of their dignity and rights can come. A tradition of legal activism, a tradition that the law should be available to those oppressed, that the law should be able to take up cases. And these are precious strengths. I don't diss the people who go to the law. I don't diss those who have faith that the law should be there to set right what government has done wrongly. So let us put our hearts into a third dream, a dream that after 30 years, we have the young people. That's the wonderful thing about tertiary education, that you meet young people who, we've had our chance, not yet, Stephen, jy mag nie die hof verlaat nie. I've had my chance. I turned 70 this year, and I'm overjoyed to be 70, because it's also, in November, 26 years since I started on antiretroviral therapy. And one of the great victories of the rule of law, of the Constitution, of the Bill of Rights, was when the Treatment Action Campaign, founded by Zaki Ahmed, scored a victory against the drug companies. They were forced to reduce their prices from the year 2000, making ARV therapies available throughout Africa to the tens of millions of us who are living with HIV in Africa. And then, an even more important victory, when Zaki and the Treatment Action Campaign called President Mbeki to account for his failure to accept scientific rationalism on the etiology of AIDS, and, most importantly, the significance of life-saving antiretroviral therapy. In November 1997, I took my first antiretroviral drugs, and I knew within 10 days that my life had been given back to me. And that's why it's a joy for me to journey to this place, to know that there are young people here who are going to take our leaders to task, who are going to take our leaders to court, who are going to have an attitude of skeptical challenge and cross-examining, questioning of the misuse of power, the abuse of power, the disintegration of state institutions, the non-delivery of services to our people. So for all those reasons, let us embrace that third feasible, attainable, achievable dream, and let us rejoice in our own power and our own agency. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that inspiring talk, Justice Cameron. I said earlier that we have a few themes in common. a few topics in common, and I wanted to explain now what I meant by that. I did my PhD on finding biological solutions or treatment solutions for HIV/AIDS, and the Treatment Action Campaign actually assisted us with continually getting funding. So we appreciate that, and I think the Treatment Action Campaign and Justice Cameron's contribution to HIV/AIDS solutions in South Africa deserves a round of applause. So we now go over to our panel discussion around constitutionalism, and I'm going to ask Justice Majiedt to introduce how we're going to do this, and he will also facilitate the panel discussion.
Thank you, Professor Meyer. We will be seated here, and I'm going to give a brief lead-in and raise some topics for discussion, but those are really just to throw out there. You can come up with anything. But we've listened to a very inspiring talk. Where we are in South Africa today, we tend to be forgetful about where we were. We're like figuratively like the Israelites in the desert heading for Canaan, the promised land, longing for the flesh pots of Egypt. I hear people say often, life was better under apartheid. Well, they got short memories. That is not to say that we're facing serious challenges in this country. I mentioned to you that last year in Dublin, I was confronted with a number of very concerned international participants asking, where is South Africa heading to? Now, Justice Cameron reminded us that a constitution is a very special law. It's a supreme law. But the late Chief Justice Ismail Mohammed very eloquently described the Constitution as the mirror of the soul of a nation. And that's what it is. It reflects where we came from. If you read the preamble, it says, whereas we come from this repressive regime. It then establishes the founding values, dignity, equality, freedom, etc. And then it sets out in great detail, Justice Cameron has alluded to the fact that we have one of the most comprehensive, detailed constitutions in the world. It's not just a framework, it goes deep down into detail. That also brings its own challenges because it is so detailed, but that's the topic for another day. But what the Constitution also did was, it did two important things, maybe more, but let me dwell on two. It established three separate arms of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. And it said, you three arms of government have to work together to make this wonderful, inspirational constitution work. But you got to stay on your side of the fence. You must understand what your constitutional bounds are. The legislature must legislate. The executive must make policies and execute them. And the judiciary must be guardians of the Constitution, excuse me, and see that the laws, particularly the supreme law, are adhered to. And so the courts are the guardians of the Constitution. Of course, the apex court is the ultimate guardian, the Constitutional Court. Now, where are we in South Africa today? We're in a South Africa where people suggested to me at that conference that if we are not a failed state already as far as the two of the three arms of government is concerned, we're at the very least a failing state. It's hard to argue against it. You've got to be realistic and objective and admit that we are, at the very least, at best for us, we are failing. The executive is failing and the legislature is failing. But what does that mean? It means that the dreams and the aspirations on the Constitution is fraught with difficulty to realize them, because primarily the agents of change, and remember, we have a transformative Constitution. Chief Justice Pius Langa, former Chief Justice, wrote an excellent piece on transformative constitutionalism. It means that we've put the past behind us, we've learned from the past, but we want to move to an egalitarian society where all have equal rights, all have freedoms, all have dignity. Straight or gay, black or white, Afrikaans, English, Venda, Sesotho, whatever you speak, And whether you live in a makuku, in a shanty, or you live in a mansion, you have equal rights. But for those rights to be realized, the Constitution is not a panacea of all ills of society. Constitution is an inanimate object, it's a paper, and it needs to be implemented. And as I've said, the major implementing agents are the legislature and the executive. So if you have a failing state, let me be benevolent and call it a failing state. As far as the legislature and the executive are concerned, what is the result? There are two results. The first is that there's pressure on the third arm of government, on the judiciary, to do the work that the other two won't do, or can't do, or both. And so I was at my alma mater at University of the Western Cape, where I gave an inaugural lecture when I was appointed as honorary professor of law. I gave a lecture on the implementation of socio-economic rights, the enforcement of socio-economic rights. And one of the members of the audience, a lawyer who works in the Western Cape provincial government, said to me, "But why can't the judiciary be more proactive and force the other two arms of government to do their work?" Now, we can't do that. We can't draw up budgets. We can't allocate resources. We can't establish policies in what we call a green paper and then developed into a white paper and becomes a bill and it goes to the legislature. That's not our work. And so we must tread carefully as a judiciary when the other arms of government are failing, that we do not go where the Constitution demands we cannot go. Because there's the principle of legality. The principle of legality simply says you can only exercise the power that the law, including the supreme law, allocates to you. I said there are two consequences. There's pressure on the judiciary, and the second consequence is that people become cynical, people become skeptical, and there's a growing movement which worries me tremendously, and it was raised last year at that conference as well. There's a growing movement of prominent academics, very, very learned people, who say that we must abolish the Constitution because it hasn't served its purpose. It has brought no change to the poorest of the poor, and they go as far as to say that CODESA was a sellout. They say CODESA was a sellout because what the negotiators, primarily from the ruling party, they don't like being called the ruling party, let me call them the governing party. The ANC, what they negotiated was political freedom, but they did nothing to secure economic freedom for us. And so we see this growing chasm where we are now the most, according to the World Bank, the most unequal society in the world. And if you do go across Joburg, if you fly across Joburg and you see Sandton and Alexandra next to each other, you see where that is true, that is real. And so as people become cynical and skeptical and call for the abolition of the Constitution, we go to the root question, is democracy serving us as a nation? And don't think of us sitting here. As we are all sitting here, we are all privileged, whether you're a student or a retired justice or a justice. We are privileged as we are sitting here. Think of those people without running water, without proper sanitation, without anything to put on the table tonight, nor was there this morning, nor will there be tomorrow morning, to feed those children who can't fend for themselves. Think of those. And so let me then ask, as we go to the Q&A, 3 questions. How do we make the Constitution a lived reality? Secondly, how do we get young people? There are many young people in the audience, and I'm very happy about that. Edwin, you're entirely right. One of the things I always say when we have graduation, Prof. Crouch, and you will remember that I always say that. It's invigorating to be among young people, especially during graduation, when they excel and they're happy and so on. But they are also the future of our country. You are the future of our country. How do we make the Constitution, the aspirations and the dreams in that document, how do we make it realizable for you guys? Because I'm on the last lap of my life. I'm winding down. And so are most of us here in front. But you must see to it that the Constitution succeeds, that we keep power to account, and that we make the poorest of the poor see what the Constitution is meant to be. And the last question that I have is the one of, which is really my pet project at the moment, is socioeconomic rights. You see, many constitutions around the world don't speak anything about socioeconomic rights, which some people call second-generation rights. I don't like that word because it seems as if they're inferior. Those are rights like health, the right to housing, and the right to education. And our court, the Constitutional Court and all other courts, are criticized because we move too slowly. They say that in the Grootboom case, which was the case about housing, Mrs. Grootboom died without a house. In the Subramoni case, Mr. Subramoni wanted dialysis treatment, and the court said, no, we can't. We have to look at the bigger picture. I'm putting it very, very simply. Mr. Subramoni died because he couldn't get the dialysis. The court said, we can't just look at you, we must look at everybody else. And so I can go on. The recent case of Tubakale, which really is very close to my heart, where I was in the minority and I was outvoted, where I said, these people have done everything since 1996. They got subsidies for houses in Tembisa on the East Rand. What more must they do? And I said they're entitled to constitutional damages, which is a rare remedy in our law. But I said this is a case of constitutional damages. Unfortunately, I got outvoted. And the majority said, worryingly, part of the majority said you can never claim constitutional damages for socioeconomic rights, which is very worrying, but at least the other part of the majority said this case is not suitable. And so what happened to those poor people? They went back to the High Court, and a year later there's a contempt of court order against the municipality. Now, contempt of court is not going to bring you a house. The government has created the machinery for you to get a house, but they're not implementing. And so that is the story of our lives in South Africa today. And so as I end off, because now it seems I'm almost taking longer than the keynote speaker, sorry about that. Please let us consider these things and say, where are we heading as a country? It affects all of us, but especially our young people. Where are we going with things the way they are now? Next year, we are told, is going to be watershed elections. What does that mean? Does that mean we're going to have coalition governments where people jump ship for 5 grand, or I understand sometimes it's negotiable down to 2 grand depending on where you are, local, provincial, or national? Where does it leave the judiciary? Where does it leave ordinary South Africans, especially the poorest of the poor? These are burning issues. I've raised 3 questions, but please raise more and we'll try and answer. I am reluctant to answer questions that will deal with future cases that may come to the court, but that's why we brought Justice Cameron. He's got nothing to lose. His pension is secured. If there are people with online questions, please send them through. We have somebody monitoring those questions and we will deal with them towards the end of the session. But I'd like to encourage you, especially young people, and ask any questions. If you are critical about anything that I'd written, please, Justice Cameron will tell you whether I was right or wrong. I won't answer the question because I'll be biased. I can't be a judge in my own cause. And so it's open for questioning. Thank you very much. There are roving mics. Just give us an indication. And I don't know if you want to add anything, Justice Cameron, about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.
There's a hand there. That is the gentleman he tells me, they always say, the nameless deputy chair of council. That's Mr. Kodi Malusi, very good friend of mine.
Thank you, Justice Majiedt. Justice Cameron, I think one is grateful for the historiography that you've outlined. And I guess the rejoinder from Justice Majiedt actually goes to the kernel of the issue. And basically, it's the tension between the fundamentals of constitutionalism as represented in the South African struggle, which tends, to be more weight towards human rights. Now, the tension as to how you reconcile that with socioeconomic rights, and I guess that's where the cynicism comes from, to say, yeah, great constitution, world acclaim, but it's actually not helping us address the dire situation, that people face. You go to bed without food, you're gonna wake up without food, but also just the failure of the ability to implement basic things. I mean, water, education, quality sanitation. And I guess that's where, the cynicism builds around, is this constitution really for the elites? Does it really address fundamental issues? And it's that tension. So I'd like to get your comment on it.
I wonder whether Justice Cameron would like to take them one by one or have two or three and then answer them.
Stephen, can I just say thank you very much for that question. To me, it really is an attack not on the shared aspirations, because the shared aspirations include the Marxist premise that your material conditions of life determine your relation to the abstract rights. And any other view, I think, is horrendously cynical. So the Constitution, I think, like Tembega, I would defend. For me, the problem has been the inept, the corrupt, the ineffective, the deviating. Why did this community have to go back for a contempt of court order? So it depends on where you locate responsibility for the lack of it. Let me be clear. I want to say, like my geliefde friend Stephen says, we haven't achieved nothing. We've definitely not achieved nothing, but we haven't achieved what we thought we'd have achieved 30 years ago. And for that, I unashamedly blame cadre deployment, opportunists, criminal syndicates within the governing party, within the governing structures of our whole country. So we can debate where to locate the culpability for our lack of greater achievement in 30 years.
May I go ahead?
Judge Majiedt, did you want to allow follow-ups, or can we continue with the hands raised?
Well, I think in all fairness, we should allow follow-ups within limitation.
Okay.
We don't want a debate, but since it is the deputy chair of council, I think we should allow him a follow-up if he has any.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, Judge Majiedt, we had a question here, and then Prof. Balim. Then we have a question there, and we had two at the back. So if I can ask the ladies to just check, please. There's two at the back there. But first over here, then Prof. Balim, and then the gentleman with the blue T-shirt.
Thank you, Program Director.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry to interrupt you, can I ask are you a student here at SPU?
I'm a student at the University of South Africa.
At University of South Africa.
Yes,
Student anywhere is a student. It warms my heart to have young people ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Program Director. My name is Badon Kotogwane. As I said, I'm a student at the University of South Africa. I'm a law student. Justice, there's been a series of racial motivated events at Stellenbosch University. There was the Hayes Marias incident with Tinus du Toit. There was the Leicester documentary and the Law Dance incident. Justice, I'd like to refer you to the Commission of Inquiry into Allegations of Racism at Stellenbosch University that was chaired by Justice Kampempe. And in her findings, part 4 of it, under paragraph 482, Justice Kampempe says that despite the university's commitment to multilingualism through the inclusion of English and Xhosa in theory, in reality, the historical preference for Afrikaans in the University of Stellenbosch is quite relatively strong. And then she goes to say that she's not convinced that in the current language policy of the institution is benefiting the institution as a whole, given the great deal of, and then she also goes to motivate to say that given the great deal of resources in time and in money, just to appease one particular minority group of the university. Now, Justice, the reason why I'm going to ask my question is because my alma mater, University of the Free State, I was a student when we were busy with our transformation project under Professor Jansen, and because of similar incidents as well. Now, I witnessed firsthand how resources were being lobbied, resources were being used to frustrate the transformation project at the University of the Free State. In fact, I was there at the Supreme Court of Appeal when Counsel Jeremy Gauntlett was representing the university. Justice, I'd like your wisdom, your honest wisdom, on the issue of universities, academia, and language. Justice Kampempe talks about how the current language policy does not allow for black academia to go into posts and rise up through the ranks of the University of Stellenbosch. Thank you, I submit, Chair.
Would you like to take that one?
I think so.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thanks for asking that. The tragedy of language is English. It has destroyed so much. Finland, University of Helsinki, is teaching in English. It is a gargantuan monster, which we mustn't I don't think Afrikaans or Sotho or Tswana or Xhosa or Zulu will stop being official languages used by many people. I don't think Finnish or Dutch. The Dutch have had to bring in a statute, which they've done this year, to require universities to continue teaching partly in Dutch. So I'm taking a few steps back, maybe to elude the specific details of your question, which is a good legal technique. But let me be truthful with you, because you asked for a truthful answer. I think that the English debate has it has ruined the chances of a tertiary level indigeneity apart from Afrikaans. The Afrikaners worked for it with significant state resources from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s to make Afrikaans an academic language. I fear that the overwhelming predominance of English may make that difficult for other languages. So was your first language one of the Nguni languages or one of the Sotho languages, or Venda, Sotho? I fear that we've all been overtaken by English, and Stellenbosch has too. 49% of those who self-identify as Afrikaans first language speakers coming into Stellenbosch want to be taught in English. So story verby. But I've evaded a lot of your question. We can talk later. Thank you.
Can I just add to that, if I may? See, language is very emotive, but we got to face the reality that Afrikaans, and that's my home language, and I'm not white, as you can see. Afrikaans was abused and was politicized by the Afrikaners for their own nefarious purposes. It's done a lot of damage to the language. Afrikaans was born in the Cape from Malays, Portuguese, Dutch, and my forebears, the Khoisan. And so, what they've done is to calculatedly build this up to this prestige, exclusive language, as if it is theirs alone. And the majority, and I wrote a judgment in the Constitutional Court, and I wrote about this history because I think the history has been slanted. But what we got to realize in South Africa is that we got to live together. It means that we must give everybody a scope. The Sotho speaker, the Tswana speaker, the Xhosa speaker, the Afrikaans speaker, the English speaker, not just English. And that's where universities are struggling to get it right because of this dominance of English that my colleague speaks about. Thank you.
So, Judge Majiedt, our next speaker is Prof. Balim.
Oh, Prof.
Thank you very much. Just a small comment on that discussion before I make the more constitutional point. Ali Mazrui, in a series of lectures called The African Condition, makes the point that sub-Saharan Africa cannot claim to be the most brutalized community, but they can claim to be the most humiliated. And one of the things that really irritates me and I find most disturbing is the persistence of that humiliation of what is African in the post-1994 South Africa. I can go to India and find Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom in any Indian language. I can't get that book in Shivenda or Setswana. Other people are reading our archive in ways that we don't even bother to read our own archive. I have yet to find a young person who's actually read Sol Plaatje's Mohodi.
There's one there.
There's one. The important point about that is that although Plaatje wrote that book in English, he was writing for a Setswana audience. The metaphor, the idiom is Setswana. It's not he was not writing for a Western English person. And yet we won't read it. Why? Because an African wrote it. And so I think that persistence of disrespect has to come to an end. And it is the point that Justice Cameron is making. I want to come back to this issue of the Constitution, and I have no doubt, and such as I understand these matters, I'm very proud to live in a country that has a Constitution as strong and as innovative about its ambition to social justice as in South Africa. The very few constitutions that match to that, and I worry about our inability to give voice to that. And so we're now in a province where of the children who die in the Northern Cape, 1 in 10 will die of starvation or malnutrition. And that, when last I looked at the statistics, those are official statistics. I don't know what the unofficial number is. And then you say, well, imagine the indignity of watching your child die of starvation. Then have conversations about alcohol consumption in the Northern Cape. And it seems to me that after the Second World War, as a global community, we promised that we would construct our social institutions to give access to at least a dignified life to the most marginal in society. And we've dismally failed in delivering on that promise. Justice Cameron has criticized government, but I'm equally critical of the private sector. Who, in their right minds, decided to give poor people debt in 2009, before that, knowing they're going to be kicked out of their houses because they can't pay it, and then very cynically taking that debt and trading it as a commodity. Who came up with those models of just simple rudeness to human beings? It's just disrespectful of poor people. And who came up with the idea that it was okay to pollute the Gulf of Mexico, put thousands upon thousands of fishermen out of livelihoods, and get a fine that is less than your tea budget? That was Shell Oil Company. People may not have the words for it, but it makes people angry. And the result is that people have become cynical about their social institutions because of misbehavior by leaders. We must ask why angry protesters run past the church to burn a clinic. There's something going on there. They trust the one institution, they've lost their confidence in the other. And so it seems as though when we have misbehaving governments, when we have misbehaving politicians, misbehaving vice-chancellors, let's be open about that. Drunk judge that drives into the wall of a, I mean, it's like, I've made this comment before, I don't want to see a judge in a casino. It's legal for other people, but it undermines my confidence in the judiciary when I see that kind of behavior. And I wonder to what extent it's not so much, it is importantly a question about the relationship between judiciary, legislature, and executive. But equally, it's a question about the role of civil society in holding all forms of leadership to account, and we haven't got that right. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Justice Cameron, any response to that?
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, one can only agree with that. And I think you make an important point, Prof. Balim, is that the judiciary must be held to account. And people say, judges think that they're above the law. We are not. And that is why there are all these disciplinary proceedings which are taking far too long, by the way, ongoing. But I think ultimately, if you look at the world, South Africa is but a small microcosm of what's happening in the world, of where powerful interests, both private and public, reign supreme. And one wonders where it's all going to end up if you look at huge conglomerates in the US and in Europe, basically control government. I mean, the gun lobby controls the Republican Party. There's another lobby that controls the Democratic Party. And so these vested interests care less about what the little guy who's running around, running from Mexico, jumping over the wall, what's going to happen to her or to him. It's all about preserving our own interests. And so, Prof, we can only, I can only agree with what you say, but for me, what is the burning issue in our country is we cannot expect civil society alone to hold these three arms of government to account without saying there must be fundamental change. Now, change is supposed to come through the ballot box. Where is it going to take us next year? That's what bothers me. That's the nature of democracy. I mean, I wasn't in the case, and I shouldn't really speak about it because it's sub judice in the sense that my colleagues are writing the judgments. There are these independent candidates association cases now before the court. And when you look at it from the outside, and I hope my colleagues aren't watching and nobody will report me, but if you look at that case from the outside, the problem really is with our electoral system. The proportional system isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. And I think we need a constituency-based system or a mixture of both. I'm venturing into politics, but I can just say as my excuse that I had a lapse because I was on long leave. And so these things are important things, but we gotta thrash them out. But let me give time for more. But Prof, thank you for that remarks. There were more
thank
people.
you. Yeah, so I just want to make sure everyone remembers. I'm timing everything, so I'll make sure we conclude in time. And I'm the person indicating who's next. So I need the ladies to please pay attention. It's the gentleman in the blue. Then we have a gentleman with a black cappy at the back, someone with very fashionable sunglasses there, and then we have someone here, the gentleman right here. So that's the fourth.
And the lady.
Okay, please. And if we have more time, then we will add additional speakers.
The lady who read Mahudi is also on the list.
Yeah, I've seen that. All right?
No, thank you very much for this opportunity, and Judge Cameron, thank you very much for such a great lecture this evening. Your lecture is around constitutionalism. I take that, but I'd like to raise two issues. One has got to do with, I know you were not giving a political lecture, but one has got to do with the cynicism that is there in our society today. And that has got to do with the elevated challenges of social cohesion in our society today. Obviously occasioned by many other factors, a myriad of factors that may be the failure of the economy and so on and so forth. But historically, the point about the formation correctly of the African National Congress, Sol Plaatje and the rest, having formed what was then called the African Native National Congress, an exclusive organization for African natives, which, and you know, that's an important point, you know, to remember. But as we progressed, you know, in our evolutionary struggle, the formation and the role and the impact that organizations like the South African Indian Congress, the South African Colored People's Organizations, the Congress of Democrats had played up to and beyond the 1955 Congress movement. I think it is important that we need to remind our society today about that historical account, because at times my political DNA is obviously ANC. Of course, I've moved on, but but the point is, you know, we have got to try to balance this historical account, and especially in the public discourse. It is important because today what you find is a sort of a disintegration of social cohesion to some extent, that you find nationalism here, you find nationalism there, you find nationalism there, African nationalism, Zulu nationalism, and colored nationalism, and it's actually a cocktail that is developing that is quite dangerous and may become an antithesis of what we had originally envisaged South Africa to be. We've got to keep that glue together of a non-racial South Africa. I thought I should make that political point first because I think it's something in the constitutional discussions and discourse that we've got to take, note of.
I'm going
And,
to have to ask that you
okay.
speed it
Second
up. We have
point.
a number
The
of
second
people.
point. The second point is constitutionalism, supreme law of the land, rule of law, and so on. I'd like your opinion on this continuing problem which results in all of the things that we have discussed here about rights and not meeting the rights and so on. This fact that the Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, and a public officials who take an oath in the Constitution can simply just ignore that, like the case that Honorable Majiedt or Judge Majiedt has indicated, can simply just ignore that, and simply carry on as if it's just me and my sectarian movement. I will do as I wish. I'll ignore the Constitution. Your opinion on that? Thank you.
Justice Cameron.
To me, thank you very much. To me, it comes back to how are we going to enforce the Constitution? And our agencies of enforcement are too weak. And for my job now, my main job is in prisons. And what we as an elite have done is that we send a tiny number of people to prison for life. We started in 1995 with 400 prisoners serving life. We now have 18,000. So the question is, why aren't we, what has happened to crime intelligence? Ek gaan al die storie agter die berg. But we have effective means to contain violent crime. The trouble is, and I can say this and no one else on this platform can, I think the violent crime reaches right up into the very top. So until we have a leader who is committed to rooting out corruption, and corruption that is willing to tackle people in the cabinet, people at the top of the police force, within the executive, at the top of the police force in the National Commissioner. So I'm not implying anything about the particular incumbent now. But I'm answering your question in a roundabout way. We have to be willing to enforce it, and it starts with the most corrupt. If we leave them untouched, we won't get anywhere in our country. That's when we get a leader who says, I'm going to set the organs of state, the police and the National Prosecuting Authority, to do their constitutionally mandated job, including those who sit at my own table, we will start making progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have the person in the back there with the black hat. And I'll remind you after that, someone who brought fashion into the room. And then we have someone down here, and then the lady down here.
Yes.
So we're not going to take new questions
Yeah,
until those ones have been addressed. I am going to ask the speaker, please get to the point as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're taking someone else's time.
Good evening, everyone in the building. As Justice, I only have one question. I'm sure you emphasized on 3 dreams. So the first 2 was dreams that covered, let me just say, partially negative parts of South Africa. And also it mainly focused on inequalities. And going to your 3rd dream, you actually emphasized on hope, meaning that something that can be more beautiful. So then here's my question. My question is, what will happen to inequality when the 3rd dream is being implemented? Saying that when the 3rd dream becomes a reality, what will happen to inequality? Also putting into consideration with regards to the Lorentz curve, whereby the inequality will never get to the equality, meaning that according to economic standards, we will never have equality of economic statuses, meaning that the people marginalized and the people in well-off economies, they will never be on the same state of economic status. So that's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's a very good question, and I thank you for asking it. We've got a crisis of inequality across the whole world, but it's manifested in South Africa in a particular way, which I think is pernicious. And there are means through taxation, there are means through corporate control, which we need to apply in South Africa. And we can actually tackle the root causes of the widening gap. We've got a super elite in the United States and Western Europe who are jetting around in private planes. And then we've got an elite, which includes, as my colleague, my lieve collega, Stephen said, which includes most of us here, because we are all in the elite. But we have to have mechanisms of taxation and corporate control and governance that secure transfers. That's what they did. That's what the apartheid government did in the 1930s and 40s. They secured massive transfers of government resources to the Afrikaners who were poorer than the English at that point. And I believe that we have to reiterate some of those measures. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Cameron. Mr. Oliphant, I think it's your turn.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. My name is Nonofo Quentin Oliphant, Justice Cameron and Justice Edwin. Currently, I am the acting president of the university. So,
SRC.
of SRC in the university, please.
We love the ambition, but we need accuracy.
Probably will get there one day. So, Justin Stephen mentioned something that just intrigued me by saying what can be done to ensure that now the reality of the Constitution is being relived. Bringing it back to our institution. We live in a lawfully ruled or governed institution. So with my experience or in my history here, I'd say that minimal is being done to create or raise awareness about the Constitution. Students are not aware. Yes, we will be sending out the statute of the university, but we know that they do not read, especially this current generation that we're living in. This generation is a generation of social media. It's a generation of everything social.
Your question?
It's not even a question, it's a recommendation.
But you have to get there.
So, what I'm recommending is that can we have an awareness when it comes to the Constitution? Because you find that students are only going to find out about the transgressions or the consequences that comes with them transgressing the law. And at the time it's late, you find that now they are being expelled for a year. They're being expelled probably for 2 years. Which now, it brings us back to the socio-economic issues. You are going back to that poverty that you come back from. You are not going to be changing anything simply because of you're expelled due to not being aware. I don't know as to whether it's because maybe we don't have a law school in here, but if the university, it's a plea that can there be awareness in or regarding the rules that we live amongst with.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Judge Majiedt or VC, I don't think this was one for Justice Cameron.
Yes, well, can I say that students need to engage continuously on the Constitution, and I like the idea that you should be talking. And may I offer my services that we can do it virtually. Get a group of students together, ask the university to set up MS Teams or Zoom, whatever you use, and let's talk about the Constitution. So I'm offering my services in public, so I can't even deny it.
Thank you very much. And a reminder also to the students, you are invited tomorrow to engage with the Chancellor, so please make use of that opportunity as well. Just for your information, Justice Majiedt, we are monitoring online. No questions yet, but a lot of compliments. People are enjoying the audience participation and the responses we have.
Can I say the same with us? We are so happy that there's this interactive discussion. I mean, the worst thing is to give a lecture of that high quality and then there's nothing back.
Thank you. It's up to you, right here. Yeah.
Good evening to the panel, justices, everyone. My question is directed to Justice Cameron. It was the French philosopher Voltaire who once said, and I'm paraphrasing now, I may not agree with what you have to say, but to the death I will defend your right to say it. Now, Justice Cameron, you mentioned earlier about the the freedom of the media, that is the freedom of the South African media, and I think you said something along the lines of the South African media is one of the freest medias in the world and definitely on the continent. Now, with that as a backdrop, I would like to have your take on on banking institutions taking decisions to withdraw their banking services to certain media houses. If I'm not mistaken, I remember a couple of years ago, ANN7 was a victim of this, and now more recently, I think the Star is a victim of this. So I'd just like to, and whether they're doing it rightfully or wrongfully, I'm not sure, but I just want to, with the backdrop of the freeness of the freedom of the media, as you mentioned earlier, I just want to get your take on banking institutions essentially now essentially shutting up media houses by saying, you know what, we will not offer banking services to you anymore. And your take on that. Thank you very much,
Thank
Justice.
you.
And before Justice Cameron answers, let me say that I'm definitely not going there because that case is now in the High Court. It's definitely coming to our court. So leave me out of it.
I want to ask the questioner, are you asking me whether Dr. Iqbal's survey is a scoundrel?
Yeah.
And do you want me to say on record whether I think he is or not? Well, I think the difficulty does lie in the massive dishonesty, shenanigans, apparent frauds. I don't have direct evidence, but I think I have enough evidence to say that there are apparent frauds. I have reasonable grounds for saying that, which have been perpetrated within the Dr. Survey's media network. So I want to make it, again, a tangential point. I think banks operate not just with impunity, but in secrecy. So we don't know what criteria they use. There's a case in the United Kingdom in the last 6 or 8 weeks where it proved that a bank unbanked a repellent politician, in my views, but just because he was a repellent politician, I think we need to cast light on banks' processes. If they said, we have determined that this man is so dishonest, so given to fraud, that we don't want him as an account holder, and we don't want any corporate entity, it may be justifiable. I'm not going to give you a concluded view on that right now. But at the moment, we don't know. And I think that's wrong. We need to know what criteria they apply. Is it a criterion of corporate honesty, of corporate propriety, corporate probity? It may be justifiable to deny banking services to crooks. And just notice I didn't say that Dr. Iqbal's survey is a crook. Did I?
No, I didn't hear it.
You see.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Retabile Shadla, and I'm the founder of the Kimberley Book Club. That's why I read Moody. But my question actually, starts off as a statement where there's an entire disconnect between young people, between just the general public and the Constitution, or people who are meant to uphold the Constitution. And I would actually agree with some of your colleagues who say that maybe it's time we abolish it and start afresh, because a lot of the things are not happening that are supposed to be happening. The people, the very entity that's supposed to uphold the law is not upholding the law. So how do we then go about it? How do we make a difference? How do we, maybe the young people or the young minds that can come up with something that will make a difference? So how do we then continue with this trajectory and say that, okay, we can take the older people, teach the younger people to uphold the law, or to learn the law, or to, just make sure that there are changes within the law? How do we do that? How do we go about that? How do we start that conversation?
Okay, thank you very much. Justice Cameron.
Retabile, thank you so much for the question. We can abolish the Constitution, and then we've got Kagame. in Rwanda. Now, I can say this, what my colleague can't say. I'd be terrified to live in Rwanda. There are people killed in Cape Town and in the Michelangelo Hotel in Johannesburg who on reasonable grounds are believed to be killed at the order of the Rwandan government. President Kagame gets 98% of the votes. Isn't that wonderful? We abolish the constitution and we can have someone get 98% of the votes. That's the one point I want to make, that when we think this is a poor constitution, we have to think realistically of the alternatives. The second point I want to make, and it's a desperately serious point, is that we need functioning state institutions to enforce the renegotiated constitution, which means our problem isn't with the content of the constitution, whether old or new or renegotiated or re-envisioned. The problem is with failing state institutions, with criminals in those state institutions, with criminals in the governing party. So again, we're back at that debate. And I would be very skeptical about a renegotiated constitution. I would say, let's get competent people, competent young people. We've got the people. We've got young people who are capable of making this country great. I want to tell a corny anecdote, if I may, Professor Meyer. I was with my colleagues in the Prisons Inspectorate at Port Elizabeth Airport. And this is a point for a racialized mind, which mine still is. It's a 1950s, 60s, and 70s, 80s mind. That airport ran like clockwork. It was 8 in the morning, there were flights, there wasn't a white person in sight. Now, if we can run an airport, which is a very complex, it's like a surgical team. You can't run an airport and let a single thing go wrong. Why can't we run a Department of Prisons, a Department of Public Works, a Department of State Administration? We've got the people who can do it, the people who were up at 5, who were there on duty, who've got the skills, because we have deployed people in the senior, in the management positions. Now that's a rant which you allowed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Retabile.
Unfortunately, nope.
I was hoping you'd ask a difficult question.
Judge Majiedt, we have one question there, and then
I want to hear if Retabile's got a
permission
follow-up,
to give
Madam
additional.
Chair.
So are you willing to give us a little bit of extra time?
I think if Retabile has a follow-up, but we need to restrict them to 2 more
Yes, I
questions.
know.
Yeah, okay.
Because,
so Retabile, you can give a response then, but please keep it brief. Then we have the lady at the top there, and this gentleman here,
That'll be
and
the
then we're
last.
going to
Yes.
close.
Thank you.
There's your mic.
I don't think it's on.
Yeah, it's not on.
Follow-up statement is that why does it have to get to the worst? Why does it have to get to Kigali in order for us to say that, okay, let's make the difference, let's make an impact? Why does it have to get to that point in order for us to actually realize that actually we are in crisis mode right now? Like not yesterday, not tomorrow, today, you know? So,
all right.
Yeah.
Hallelujah.
So we have someone at the top there. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to the panel. My name is Janice Jacobs. This isn't really a question. It's just something that I have observed throughout the years, because I'm still actually living on the other side of social, economic, and I still need to see that reality happen, where my social, economic rights will be realized, where I won't have to struggle for water because a pipe burst and I keep on calling but with no assistance. The reason why I'm entering law, it's because of the injustices that I have seen. Justice is very slow, but the thing that actually gets to me the most is the fact that the people that need the Constitution the most are the people that are ignorant. The truth has been, I don't know, has it been kept from them, but the people do not know their rights. The mama in the wheelchair, the auntie next door, if I have to go to her and I have to ask her, what do you know about the Constitution? What do you know about your rights? What is it that you know? They will tell me that they do not know. That is why the governing party can take advantage, because our people have been kept in the dark. As long as our people are kept in the dark, as long as our people do not know what is rightfully due to them, as long as our people do not know the reason why they stand in long queues when it is election day and why they cast their votes on that ballot paper, the country will continue to be in disarray. But what I want to understand is that the Constitution was meant for these people, the most vulnerable of society. But why is it that the Constitution is so far? The Constitution is here, and yet the people that need the Constitution here is the most. I once went to a vaccination site, and the only thing that was handed out was the Constitution, the book, and then a few pamphlets. How are our people going to know their rights? Because the moment you tell a person what is rightfully due to them, it's the day that you give them power, and then they can act accordingly. They will not make decisions based on fear, because most of our people, the most vulnerable in our society, do not want to let the ruling party go because they are afraid of the benefits that they are going to lose, that just in case apartheid comes back, or just in case they are not going to get these benefits. But
right.
yes, it's the same problem year in
You have to
and
get
year
to
out.
Thank you. Just hang on.
You see, if I may say something, Justice Cameron, about that, you see, you can't abolish an inanimate object because things are not happening. It's a document, it's a constitution. It says, for every right, there's a concomitant obligation. So the right to health, the concomitant obligation is on government to realize that right. It says progressive realization within reasonable means. So you are throwing out the baby with the bathwater if you say abolish the Constitution. What we must do is to hold to account those who are not implementing the Constitution, as I've said earlier. How do we conscientize ordinary people, the mama in the wheelchair, the auntie next door, about the Constitution? That's where you young people come in. So let me offer again. You don't have to be a law student. There are no law students at this institution, but you don't even have to be a law student at UNISA. He's in another position, but he's also welcome. Let's have a group discussion, maybe once every 2 weeks. We do it virtually. I can do it from anywhere. And we talk about the Constitution. How do we make, because real change will only come when young people get involved in what's happening in society. And you don't have to join a political party. Start conscientizing people next door about what the Constitution means. And I'm prepared to help with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Majiedt. Our final question.
Good evening. I am Romano Jacobs, and I have a question that is more forward-looking in order to resolve the problem. In order for us to realize what the Constitution is, the dream that we want to have, that there is X that is feeding the Constitution. For instance, you have your BE, and you also have your Employment Equity Act to ensure that you achieve the objection or the objectives of the Constitution. So what my question is the acts are very clear and simple, and there's also standard operating procedures telling you exactly what to do. So we are still getting that wrong. So now I'm having a question, or I want to find out what is the problem with the executive that they are unable to achieve that. Are they lazy, or is there a lack of intelligence to just monitor the system in order to get what we all want? So the question is, what is the root problem, or what do you think is the root problem? Is it, are they lazy, or is there a lack of management or intelligence in order for us to achieve what we want?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Justice Cameron? Let me answer it this way. We have some of the richest resources in the world, minerals. We've got excellent mining companies, the best mining engineers in the world. We mine these things by the thousands of tons. We've got a market in China and India and elsewhere waiting for it. They can't get enough of it, but we can't get it to them. Where do you think is the problem? He's the wrong person who's in charge of the job there. Why is the wrong person there? Because employment equity and all these other statutes which are supposed to deliver these things are not applied correctly. Why are they not applied correctly? Because people, my friend, don't buy Mercedes and Porsches anymore. They now buy jets and helicopters. And so that is the problem in the country. There's a greed and an avarice of people who just want to consume and consume. And every 4 years, we hand out food parcels. And the mama will vote for us. It's unsustainable. And for as long as young people sit still and see, hey, things are bad, and don't do anything. Because remember, you are the future. Our lives are over. I must see to it that my grandchildren, those ones who keep me so busy there in Joburg, that they are looked after. But I'm in a position to do that. Will you be in a position to do that? Will the other one who can't even come to university be in a position to do that? Young people must grasp the nettle. And we got to do it soon. And so the answer really is that when we, and I want to basically wrap up, what Justice Cameron has said to us is, we had apartheid, which was a brutal, brutal regime. We had this dream that Mr. Mandela has come out of prison, Mr. Tambo is back from exile, and we're going to create a better society. And we're going to look after the poorest of the poor, because that is the constituency of the liberation movements. The constituency of the liberation movements weren't the elite in Sandton and in Constantia and in Umhlanga and so on. It were the poorest of the poor. And so we had hope, we had high hopes. But those hopes were shattered. But we've got to hold on to this dream. And who are the primary people who must hold on to that dream? Are the young people in the room. And so I'm an eternal optimist. The judiciary is doing what as best it can, but we can't sort out the problems of this country. In fact, it's improper that judiciary should be expected to sort out problems that the legislature, the executive must sort out. And so can I encourage young people? I've made this offer. Use any one of the officials here as a liaison. I suggest perhaps Ms. Maestri in the VC's office. And we can organize sessions where we talk about the Constitution and how do we just tell the mamas and the aunties and the papas about, and the malumes about the Constitution. And I want to hand over to the Director of Ceremonies to do the wrap-up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I just want to make sure, Justice Cameron, did you want to make any closing comment?
Beslis.
Okay, thank you. Then it is my opportunity now to welcome our current Chair of Council, Judge Plaatje, to make closing comments. And after that, I'll ask you to please just remain a few minutes. We want to hand over a gift to Justice Cameron from Sol Plaatje University. But first, over to the Chair of Council.
Program Director, the first Chancellor of the University of Sol Plaatje, and the Justice of the Constitutional Court, Justice Majiedt and spouse, the 15th Chancellor of the University of Stellenbosch, and former Justice of the Constitutional Court, Justice Edwin Cameron and spouse, the Chancellor of Wits University, who I believe she's joining us online, Dr. Jody Dlamini, the Judge President of the Northern Cape High Court, Justice Pule Tlaletsi, and other justices present from the Northern Cape High Court, Dr. Zamani Soul, I beg your pardon, the Premier of the Northern Cape Province, whom I also believe is joining online, the Executive Mayor of Sol Plaatje, the DG, and the DDG of DHEAD, our donors, members of council, the former Vice Chancellor of the University of Sol Plaatje, Prof. Yunus Balim and family, and the Vice Chancellor of University of Western Cape, Prof. Tyrone Pretorius, who I believe is joining online, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Sol Plaatje, Prof. Andrew Crouch, members of the academia present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. The authority conferred upon me to close this session is not an easy one because I have I have to end this stimulating debate. Nevertheless, I feel deeply honored to propose closure of the proceedings on behalf of the entire university community. Program Director, allow me to pay my debt of gratitude to Justice Cameron for gracing this wonderful occasion. Justice Cameron, what an amazing and thought-provoking lecture. We heartily thank you for articulating these very complex issues so lucidly that the youth present in this precinct are able to comprehend. All of us, we are able to comprehend what you had said. We all acknowledge that the future of this country is placed in our youth. They would have to devise innovative ways of eradicating systemic barriers and implement the transformation mission embedded in our Constitution. We took everything you said this afternoon to heart. The lecture could not have come at the most opportune time, that is when the university celebrates its 10th anniversary. Transformation, as we know, is an all-encompassing concept which includes the provision of greater access to education. The formal establishment of this university by proclamation in August 2013, issued under the Higher Education Act, is one of those gains that emerge out of the constitutional promises that we have reflected upon this afternoon. This lecture and debate made me reimagine an ideal South Africa where all the people lived in peace and dignity, an ideal South Africa where all people have equal rights and equal opportunities of employment, an ideal South Africa where our women and children are able to walk freely anywhere and at any time, including late at night or in the early hours of the morning, without fear of any acts of violence or cruelty being perpetrated against them, an ideal society where poverty is considered a thing of the past and equality reigned supreme. The lecture and debate reminded me of what the late Chief Justice Pius Langa said during the prestige lecture at Stellenbosch University on 9 October 2006, 17 years ago. He said that the epilogue to the interim constitution provided the basis for an understanding of transformative constitutionalism, in that it provides, and I quote, a historic bridge between the past of a deeply divided society characterized by strife, conflict, untold suffering, and injustice, and a future founded on the recognition of human rights, democracy, and peaceful coexistence and development opportunities for all South Africans, irrespective of color, race, class, belief, or sex. This is a magnificent goal of a constitution to heal the wounds of the past and guide us to a better future. He concluded that this was the core idea of transformative constitutionalism. I see this as the transition that you were referring to, Justice Cameron, earlier on. Program Director, ladies and gentlemen, South Africans, we had said it this afternoon, most of us, that they have to contend since the advent of democracy with a high rate of unemployment, gender inequality, insufficient access to housing, food, water, healthcare, electricity, and many other social challenges. With the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine geopolitical conflict, the so-called 2021 July riots, natural disasters in several parts of this country, our socio-economic challenges continue to grow by leaps and bounds. This in itself engenders a sense of despair amongst our South Africans. But I say this afternoon, let us not despair. We should not despair. The lecture teaches us of a dream worth fighting for. The provision of services and the equal opportunities are key to the transformative constitutionalism, or key to our constitutional transformative mission. But more importantly or significantly, the lecture clarifies that transformation is not merely transient. It's not something that is here and we have to conclude it at a particular point in time in future. Truth be told, we are still far from achieving our goal of an equal society. However, transformative constitutionalism is not destined to end upon the realization of that goal. Transformation remains an enduring ideal in the world of endless possibilities and uncertain future. Justice Cameron, we will fight for our constitution, the supreme law of this country, that we have to promise ourselves this afternoon. The fact that so many of us converged here this afternoon to listen to the lecture and engage in this important dialogue speaks to the level of our commitment towards taking active steps to achieving substantive equality and realizing that dream worth fighting for. All in good time, challenges will taper off and dissipate. We need to move. I've heard some of the attendees requesting that we need to be informed of our constitution. Prof. Crouch, we would have to have more of this lecture on constitution, raising awareness to the public out there, that we promise to do. We recognize the substantial progress, really, that has been made through the introduction of various legislative and other equitable, I beg your pardon, socio-economic reforms programs aimed at equalizing opportunities for social progress and improving the quality of life. We also recognize that more needs to be done so that the transformation agenda promised in our constitution come to fruition. And by looking at our institutions, and we have all certainly benefited from this afternoon lecture. There's really, truly plenty to reflect upon as we part ways this afternoon. Program Director, allow me, as I end this lecture, to also thank our Chancellor for attending to all the necessary logistics to make this proceeding a resounding success. I also thank all our guests, participants, and attendees for their useful and constructive comments, not forgetting the Vice Chancellor, the executive team, and support staff for organizing this event, and the Program Director for the successful facilitation of the proceedings this afternoon. May God protect our people. Nkosi sikeleli Africa, Morena boluka setšhaba sa heso, God sian South Africa. God bless South Africa. Muzimu vatusetsa Africa. Hosi katekisa Africa. With that preamble in our constitution, my chancellors, ladies and gentlemen, I declare this session duly closed, and I thank you. I'm told that light refreshment will be served in the foyer, but I close by saying, Pula.
Just